And good morning again. Well, there are two real grabbers in the headlines of the big East Coast newspapers this morning. First, the New York Times says the United States is considering stepping up the pace of our Iraq pullout. And the Washington Post says U.S. and Iraq is scaling down negotiations over what to do with those forces. Long-term agreement will fall to the next president. That story goes on to confirm what we've been hearing here in Washington, and that is that the Iraqis, before they agree to any long-term agreements about where we go from here, they want some sort of definite timetable about when the United States will have its forces out of Iraq. Joining us to talk about it, two people who should know something about it: Senator Carl Levin, chairman of the Armed Services Committee in the Senate, and from Indianapolis, the ranking Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Dick Lugar. I guess, Senator Levin, and I'll start with you, I would ask two questions here. If the Iraqis are saying they want a timetable for when we're leaving Iraq, what is wrong with that? But first, let's address this first issue. The Times reporting this morning that we may be about to speed up withdrawals of troops from Iraq and probably before the November elections. What can you tell us about that, Senator Levin?
Well, that would be very good news if it's true. The majority of the Senate has voted to speed up the reduction of forces from Iraq. It's the only way to force the Iraqis to take responsibility for their own government. For too long, they have avoided that responsibility, particularly politically, and they still are ducking the key political issues. But it would be important for us. And again, the majority of the Senate has voted to redeploy most of our troops and to have a timetable with goals in that timetable for that redeployment. And instead of resisting the Iraqi apparent effort to have a timetable, we should welcome that. It's long overdue. We should insist that there be a timetable, because there is no other way to force the Iraqi government to work out those political settlements which are absolutely essential to end the conflict.
Well, have you seen any indication that the administration is planning to speed up this with these withdrawals? I would take it, as chairman of that committee, you would be getting some indication of that if it were about to happen.
There's a number of indications, both comments of Secretary Gates, also of General Petraeus, have indicated that we can expect that these reductions will resume in the fall. There's been a number of times that they've said or hinted at that. I am very confident it's going to happen. The pressure from the American people has been intense. There's now 5.5 years of loss of American lives and Iraqi lives, huge numbers of wounded, $6 billion a month. It's long overdue that we force the Iraqis to take responsibility for their own government. And when they're willing to have that kind of a timeline, it seems to me, for heaven's sake, why should we be resisting that? We ought to be insisting on it rather than resisting it.
All right, well, let's go to Senator Lugar. What can you tell us about this, Senator Lugar?
Well, I think there are two factors I would add to what Carl Levin has said. First of all, Prime Minister Maliki has some very difficult political problems. He is attempting to prepare for elections in Iraq, and it's apparent that a majority of the Iraqi people would like to assert sovereignty, and that means American withdrawal. So, on the one hand, he was talking about having the Parliament okay an agreement with the United States, but he has abandoned that, and that's why the story, I think, kicks the thing down the road past the Bush administration, maybe past the Maliki administration, unless he wins the election, because he was looking for a 2/3 majority. Whereas back home, we were being told essentially that these status of forces agreements don't require congressional approval, and the administration was standing rather firm on that, so we were not going to have our vote. The second factor is that Maliki has a problem with regard to the oil agreement, and even finally the provincial election agreements. He has people in the Kurdish area who already are making oil deals, and this is quite outside exactly how that oil money is going to be distributed. So that's a real problem. Plus the people in Anbar, Sunni, essentially are saying we're not really sure the security situation is that sound in Anbar or on the borders. So hold up a little bit before you get this status of forces agreement, which all leads to, as I say, moving it down the road out of the picture. Now, as far as our troops are concerned, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, has indicated that we need troops in Afghanistan, but he has no troops to send to Afghanistan. So it is logical in the military sequence that we are going to move troops out of Iraq, not immediately perhaps to Afghanistan, but at least to relieve the strain which is intense right now upon our armed forces. And that is why it may make sense. I read in the stories this morning, General Petraeus still may have a word of caution, because he will say, with all this movement, the goal of America to have a stable Iraq, a democracy that works and so forth, might be in a little bit of jeopardy, given the Kurdish oil, given the Anbar security, given other factors which are not quite gelled.
Well, it sounds to me like what you're saying here is that these troops, while they may be drawn down from Iraq, they may not be coming back to the United States. They may be going right on to Afghanistan, or at least brought back so other troops can go to Afghanistan.
That could very well be the case, because the demand for troops out there is intense. The battles on the border with Pakistan, with the Al-Qaeda forces assisted by the Taliban, are a source of more killing of American troops right now than anything occurring in Iraq.
Senator Levin, how bad do you think the situation is in Afghanistan is? Should we expect troops to be sent out there, more troops?
Well, first of all, we ought to insist that other NATO countries carry out their commitments to send troops to Afghanistan. The Bush administration took its eye off the ball in Afghanistan when it went to Iraq and let the Al-Qaeda leaders escape into Pakistan. There is a real problem from Pakistan. I just returned from Pakistan and Afghanistan a few weeks ago. That border is clearly open to terrorists coming across from Pakistan. The Pakistani government cannot be relied on to take on those extremists in their midst, including Al-Qaeda in the north, in the tribal areas. And so we are going to have to help Afghanistan do what it wants to do, which is to take on Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. But we've also got to insist that our NATO allies carry out their commitments, both in terms of troops, but also in terms of the capability of those troops, the willingness of those NATO troops to take on people crossing the border and threatening to cross the border. But really, Pakistan, as far as I'm concerned, is not reliable when it comes to taking on the extremists in their midst, either in the north in the tribal areas or in around Quetta, where Taliban has free run and just crosses the border from those safe havens in Pakistan.
Let me ask both of you while I have you here. We saw this weird series of events this week involving Iran. We had the Iranian foreign minister here sort of hinting that maybe Iran would like to start talking about some sort of negotiations leading to lifting the sanctions on their country because Iran is moving forward with its nuclear program. And then we see this show of missiles being fired. We don't know if the photos were doctored or not. It appears that they were, at least some of them. What's going on here, Senator Levin? Where is Iran on all this, and what's this about?
Well, Iran is a major threat, the biggest threat in the region. It's the source of terrorism. It is the source of weaponry used against our troops in Iraq. We need to have the world united in confronting Iran. We need a much tighter sanction regime. We have not tightened our own sanction regime. We should not only have a prohibition against our companies doing business in Iran, we ought to have a prohibition against their subsidiaries doing business in Iran. So we've got to really tighten the sanction regime around Iran, but we need a united world community, including Russia, to be part of that confrontation. And we've done some things which put off Russia.
Yeah, should we have direct talks with them?
We should participate in the talks with Iran, but we also got to stop putting a stick in the Russian eye, because the Russians have no interest in a nuclear-armed Iran, and they are willing to really take strong steps against them, but we keep pushing off Russia in a number of ways. First of all, with the missile defenses in Europe, which are not a defense against Iranian missiles, but also this statement of Senator McCain really troubled me, that we should kick Russia out of the G8, the economic leaders of the world. I think it has the exact wrong effect in terms of including Russia as part of this confrontation against Iran.
All right, and quickly, Senator Lugar, your thoughts on that?
Well, my thought immediately follows Senator Levin. We need Russia there, but likewise, we need to have the talks. Xavier Solana, on behalf of the Group of Five, of which we're a part, is going to be talking to Iranians. I would like to see Undersecretary Bill Burns around the table there with them at that point. I think it's important that we intervene. We recognize that the Iranians last week had their missile test. Often they do saber rattling before negotiations, but they're hurting. The sanctions we already have there have made a big difference in terms of their banking and in terms of their exports. There's 25% inflation in the country. The regime of Ahmadinejad is in some difficulty, and therefore I would favor more sanctions, more world involvement. We ought to have everybody around the table, including Russia.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you for talking about these very complicated but very, very difficult subjects.